Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the March 2021 meeting of the Board of the Medicines and Healthcare Products Regulatory Agency, held in public. My name is Stephen Lightfoot, and I'm the chair of the MHRA Board, and my role today is to lead us through today's agenda. Now, for those of you who've not attended one of our board meetings before, I've got to start by saying that this is a board meeting held in public, and it is not a public meeting. It's also important to state that the role of the MHRA board is for the strategic leadership of the agency, and we're not responsible for the individual regulatory decisions on individual products. That, of course, is done very ably by the officials within the agency and, of course, with the support of our independent expert working groups. I should also make you aware of the fact that today's meeting will be recorded so that we can share the video online, both on our website for the public to see and on our intranet site for our staff to be able to see what we do. Now, I'm delighted that 43 people have registered to observe today's meeting. We've got 15 people representing patients and patient groups. We've got 10 other people from other organisations who with interest in our work, and 18 members of our staff. So thank you for joining us today, and a very warm welcome to each and every one of you. Now, as always, our agenda is based around our strategic objectives, and today we've got items around enabling healthcare access, around ensuring patient safety, and around building our dynamic organisation. Now, as the board works through the agenda, members of the audience can in fact ask questions through the link to www.sli.do, that's www.sli.do, and enter the code #MHRA-MAR21. Now, the way we'll actually handle the questions is that Rachel Bosworth, our Director of Communications, will collate the questions, and at the end of the session, we'll have the public Q&A session. She will read them out, and then obviously we'll answer everything that is asked of us. So Rachel, can you just give us a wave just so everyone can see who you are? That's great. Thank you, Rachel. While I'm doing introductions, I'd also just like to go around the screen and just introduce each of my colleagues. So first of all, I'd like to introduce Dr. June Rain, our Chief Executive. Just give us a wave, June. Thank you. Dr. Sam Atkinson, our Chief Quality and Access Officer. We've got John Fundry, our Chief Operating Officer. We've got John Quinn, our Chief Technology Officer, and Dr. Christian Schneider, our Chief Scientific Officer. And then, of course, we've got our independent non-executive directors. We've got Dr. Barbara Bannister. Give us a wave, Barbara. Thank you. We've got Mandy Calvert. We've also got Professor Bruce Campbell. We've got Mercy Jessingham. We've got Anthony Rogers. And we've got Professor David Webb. And we've also got Michael Whitehouse. Now, I'm also particularly pleased today to welcome Catherine Glover. So Catherine's our new Deputy Director of Medicines Regulation and Prescribing at the Department of Health. And Catherine's actually in a job share with Helen Lovell. So generally, Catherine will work on a Monday to Wednesday, and Helen will work on a Wednesday to Friday. So as our board meetings are always on Tuesday, Catherine, you've drawn the short straw, so it looks like you'll be joining us most times, I think. But I think between you, having met you, you've got a huge amount of experience in all parts of the Department of Health. That will be incredibly helpful to the agency, and I think we look forward to receiving your contributions during the meetings and also for your advice outside the meetings as well. So welcome to the team.
Thank you. Also
very pleased to welcome Fleur Ruder from the Government Legal Department. And we've also got Greg Chalmers, Interim Deputy Director from the Scottish Government. So one of our devolved administrations is present. And then last but by no means least, we've got Natalie Richards, our Board Secretary. And then we're ably being supported by Claudine, Jude and Martin in the background, just to make sure the meeting happens. So that's the introductions from my point of view. Have I missed anything or missed anybody? I don't think so. So that being the case, then let's move on into the agenda. As far as apologies for absence are concerned, I've had 2 apologies. So Cathy Harrison, the Chief Pharmaceutical Officer for Northern Ireland, and also Alison Strath, the Interim Chief Pharmaceutical Officer for Scotland, have both sent their apologies. And we're sad to be able to miss today's meeting. I don't believe we have any other apologies for absence that I'm aware of. So that being the case then, let's move on to any declarations of interest. And I think, Bruce, you might want to say a few words.
Yes, two issues this morning. The first is a declaration of a non-specific interest, not actually related directly to the pharma or medical device industries, but nevertheless, I mentioned it last time and it's now come to fruition following the award of a contract by NHSX to an organisation called the PSC, for whom I'm acting as a paid consultant. This is for a 3-month project with NHX, aimed at the development and rollout of an automated system for recording all medical devices used in hospital trusts, and for getting that up onto the NHSX database, which in the larger scheme of things will liaise with MHRA's planned database. So in a sense, it's a happy coincidence. And so that's my renewal of declaration. My second issue, which I say with a slight smile, is that I had an operation on my left leg 5 days ago, and I have been ordered that I'm not to spend more than half an hour sitting at a desk. So on a couple of occasions during this meeting, I shall turn my camera off and go for a short walk.
Thank you, Bruce, and very important to keep well. So thank you for that. And very pleased about your declaration. I think it'll be very helpful, in fact, actually, the coordination with NHSX and our own databases as well. So that being the case then, are there any other declarations that have not already been made? No? Okay, Natalie, I think if we can just record Bruce's, that would be great. If we then move on to the minutes of the last meeting, so that's on page 2 of the board pack. First of all, can I just check that they're an accurate record of the last meeting? I'm not seeing any objections, so on that basis, I'll take silence as consent. So Natalie, if we can say the minutes are approved. If we then just move on to the action list, which is on page number 7. The first action, number 7 itself, is about providing an update to the board on the Memorandum of Understanding with NICE. June, that's been referenced in your CEO report. Are you content just to take any questions at that particular point? Yeah, you're on mute, June, but I assume that's a yes.
Definitely.
Yeah, that's fine. Okay, I think it's also probably just helpful to say that we did have a very good meeting, June and I, with the Chair and Chief Executive of NICE at the beginning of the month. The other thing that's not in June's report is that we agreed that we'd actually, in October, would hold a joint meeting of the board of the MHRA and the board of NICE, which I think is a really good opportunity, because I think we've got a shared agenda in terms of increasing patient access to new medicines. And we've also got opportunities about how we actually improve patient safety and also patient engagement. So it's very much a shared common agenda there. NICE is going through a refresh of its board. A number of new non-executive directors will be joining their board in the months to come. And similarly, we'll have a similar situation later in the year as well. So it just seemed like a good opportunity to show a real commitment to improving both healthcare access and patient safety. So that's sort of a plan for the future. No details have yet been decided, but that's something that we'll look to do. In terms of the rest of the actions, then in terms of the review of CPID, we're going to hold that at our board seminar in April, and that's now a fixed date. The remaining actions are, as I understand it, are either not yet due or on today's agenda. So I think on that basis, I think we can say that's the list of actions we've got. Can I just check if there are any other matters arising from the last meeting that we need to cover now that are not already covered? Good. Okay. That being the case then, let's move on to the first substantive item, and that's really an update from June in terms of what are the current key issues from the CEO's point of view. June, over to you.
Well, thank you, Stephen, and good morning again, everyone. The report for this month brings together our current areas of focus, and I think you can see quite clearly from this report that it has been a tremendously busy time with a number of important priorities all running concurrently. So I'll try and pick out some of the key messages. Patient safety always remains our priority, and it certainly is in the spotlight at this moment. Our intensive work continues on the safety monitoring of COVID-19 vaccines with the weekly publication of all the reports. And certainly whenever a trend emerges or a concern, a very intensive review then takes place, such as the issues now in the spotlight around blood clots and low platelets and the AstraZeneca vaccine. So while our intensive scientific review of this issue is underway, We are very clear that after 11 million doses in the UK and 3, possibly 4 cases of blood clots with low platelet counts, this isn't greater than the number we would have expected in the vaccinated population. And of course, it's in the context of the known mortality of COVID-19 and its long-term consequences. So pending the outcome of our review, and our expert group is meeting today, our advice remains to continue to use the AZ vaccine, which prevents hospitalisation and death. So that's the status there, but please expect more updates, particularly at the end of today and tomorrow. I'll highlight 1 or 2 other matters because there are some important updates on safety. Our valproate registry was launched with NHS Digital to have a much better way of monitoring compliance with the current regulatory restrictions around use of valproate in pregnancy, and it will include other anti-epileptics in due course. And we've already heard mention of CPRD. It's participating in prescribing improvement initiatives around important medicines such as antidepressants and antipsychotics, together with the Royal College of GPs. So patient safety, very much our top priority. But that's not to neglect our focus on healthcare access, and the announcement that we have a new approach to the variants for the COVID-19 in terms of updates to vaccines was a landmark for us because it was done in concert with Australia, Canada, Singapore and Switzerland, so as to support access very broadly. We issued our first innovation passport for a promising medicine, this belzutifan, for a rare genetic condition that may lead to cancer, and as Chair has said, a big focus on partnerships with NICE, with SMC, with the Health Research Authority and Human Tissues Authority. So lots going on there to improve access for patients, but none of this would be possible. And I have to say, 1 year on from lockdown, our staff are the asset that we talk about, the people who absolutely look after the public and are there to make UK a great place to develop medicine. So our design of our future operating model is advanced. We have a series of challenge sessions that took place to develop our delivery plan, and things are moving ahead really very quickly on that. So 3 key messages: safety, our first priority; work to improve access is always in focus, and our dynamic organisation continues to protect patients and the public through the efforts and commitment of all our staff. So an update that's not in the review, but a lot there also to have in focus, Chair. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I continue to be impressed by the sheer breadth of activities that the agency is involved in, actually. So I think that's excellent. So thank you very much for that. Bruce, do you want to kick us off with a question?
Yes, just as an indication from June, the Access Consortium, I mean, I know this is its first guideline. Just in principle, does one country take a lead in doing this? And in terms of the way it works, does there tend to be just easy concordance between the different countries, or has this collaboration exposed difference in perspective? How does this work?
Great question. The Access Consortium has evolved over some period of time where work is led by one country, whether it's on access to new products or it's in relation to biosimilars or generics. There is a very much first among equals approach that one country will take a lead. As new members of the Access family, we've been busy integrating into all the various working groups. But when it came to the COVID-19 variants, the expertise here was very much looked to by the other countries. And I'd like to mention Dr. Christian Schneider's leadership role that in fact made that a very straightforward consensus. Having said that, it's not always the case, and going back when we were observers, there was quite some discussion about the level of efficacy that all those countries would accept for a COVID-19 vaccine. But all that debate produced a more robust position. So it's early days, but certainly where leadership is needed, where we have the technical and leadership and strategic approach, we will move forward and very much listen to the other countries.
Great, thank you. Anthony, how about you next?
Sorry, it's just a quick follow-up question regarding the QI report with the Royal College of GPs, because I think it's really important that we're doing these things, as we've seen with valproate and other areas. But my question is around how we're going to follow up on this. I know we don't have a responsibility to ensure action from the quality improvement reports, but I think we have a sense of moral responsibility to determine, particularly with what we learnt over the valproate issue, where we were raising issues and perhaps action was slow to follow. So you may not have the answer now, but I would really be interested in how we're going to ensure activity follows action in this case, whether it's the Royal College of GPs, whether it's the commissioning groups, or whether it's left to the individual, and what we are going to do to look at this in the future.
Indeed, valproate was the first important medicine where we integrated our activities with the RCGP feedback, and CPRD were really instrumental in making sure that prescribers of valproate had the evidence. So what we do is to work closely with partners in the HSC who are able to then follow through, sometimes with further information for GPs, sometimes with incentives. And in the case of valproate, that was then incorporated in the routine monitoring of GPs. When those prescribing targets are met, there is benefit to the practice. So that's one way of doing it. Certainly, the key lead, Rachel Tharby-Foskett, keeps us informed of impact. But I would say all regulatory tools are on the table that we would discuss with the HSC. We see it as a really important way of helping prescribers do the best they can for patients, because that's clearly what they want to do. So it's a nice integrated model of our evidence-based decision-making and that outreach at the individual level. Of course, there's always more to do, and we will continue to see how well this works as we look at the impact of regulatory action.
Follow-up, Chair. Yeah, I just wonder, I'm sure we have. I know we can't share the details of reports because obviously they're individual practice level, but whether we've spoken to the patient organisations that represent, because this is a vulnerable group of people, and let them know that this activity is underway. I think it would be helpful because they can then work with the families of community members to make sure, is my GP aware of this? Has activity happened?
Certainly with valproate, we have that virtuous cycle where the patient groups are all involved and aware, and we meet with our valproate stakeholder network periodically. But I think you've put your finger on it. Is there a parallel action in the antidepressants area or antipsychotics? And that's very much with us in the MHRA to check that that's in place.
Yeah, I'm sure we could contact Mind and groups like that and let them know this has happened.
Yeah, super.
Okay, I think that's very helpful, Anthony. Thank you. Michael, can I come to you, please?
Yeah, you can hear me. June, thank you again for your report. My question really relates to use of real-world data. To receive a vaccine, the unique identifier number is the NHS number that everybody has, that then feeds into our national systems that provides the data about who's had a vaccine. And I presume it's very important for CPRD and the role of MHRA in monitoring and surveillance. I just wondered what assurance you get as regulator around the quality of that data, that its completeness, any margin of error. I don't know if that might fall more to John Quinn, but I'm interested that the public get assurance that the information coming in to the organisation is of the best quality possible.
Yes, indeed. And this was a clear part of our planning when we anticipated that very rapid identification of any trends would be so important in this area when a lot of people are going to be vaccinated day by day. So we've worked closely with NHS Digital on this one, and as you'll see from the report, we expect that the data will be updated. It's 24 to 48 hours, and we've been testing ourselves. There's always a trade-off with quality and speed. Yes. Our GP colleagues are incredibly meticulous, and I would say a large part of that slight lag is because many GPs absolutely want to be clear that the data that comes in from their catchment is excellent. Of course, there will be others in other practicing administering communities that aren't as hands-on as some of the GPs. So it is a good point, but I would hope and I would wish to say that the quality that then links in with our yellow card scheme, we do the rapid cycle analytics, overall seems to be very much what we would expect. If further follow-up is needed, we could track through NHS Digital how they ensure quality.
Okay, thank you, June. I think it's important that the public have that assurance from you, so thank you.
Great, thank you, Michael. Mandy.
Thanks, Stephen. It was a bit of a build on Antonia's question, actually, around the quality and prescribing information. We only have 40% of GPs working with CPRD and sharing anonymised data. The note implied that feedback was only given to them. So it was one thing about how do we broaden that to all GP practices, which again feeds on what Michael was saying, to make sure that all are getting the same messages, and how do we check that the things are actually happening. And I think that feedback loop is really, really important. So just to give us assurance, we've got 40% of our participating GPs, but how is the message getting to all GPs?
Surely, and I do think that there is a little gap that you put your finger on there, although the DHSC side, the policy side that will make sure that any incentives apply to all, will actually create an awareness. And I assume that local prescribing data through the regional pharmacists and the outreach that goes through pharmacy may well enable that prescribing data to be available, albeit there won't be the bespoke reports from CPRD. What we will talk about when we have the session on CPRD is how to drive up that proportion, so as to close the circle. But certainly we're learning as we go, and we want to make sure that every prescriber has access to good evidence on which to improve their practice, plus, as necessary, the incentives in place.
Is that okay, Mandy? Or was there a follow-up there?
No, I think it's just very important we keep that loop going. So it's good to know that we're learning on that. But thank you.
That's great. So, Michael, I assume that's an old hand, or was that a second question? Looks like it was an old hand. Okay. Were there any final questions for June on this particular paper? Okay, I think we should note that with thanks, June. I think, as I said, it's a very extensive report with a lot of different activities, but thank you very much for that. I can see on the chat function that a number of attendees are wanting to raise questions. Again, just to reassure everybody that we have received all the pre-submitted questions. They will be covered at the end. We've got a 20-minute session at the end for a public question and answer session, so we'll pick those up at that particular point. If that's okay. So if we then move on to the next item on the agenda, then obviously moving on to healthcare access, and in particular, how is the agency going to build on its scientific expertise and laboratory research to help achieve the vision of protecting and improving patient health? Really important topic. So Christian, do you want to kick us off with this, please?
Thank you, Chairman. Indeed, so for the benefit of the public, there was a paper last autumn where I talked about impactful science and research at the agency. So that covered laboratory research, computer science, and regulatory science, which can be policy-based, so to speak, but of course it's much more than this. So this paper focuses only on laboratory science and also interlinks of the functions that we have. So we support 2 laboratories, a larger facility is South MIMS that houses the National Institute for Biological Standards and Control. And we have the laboratories that are hosted at the LGC group at Teddington, which host the MHRA and British Pharmacopoeia labs. I won't go into detail because I'm sure that colleagues and people will have been able to read most of the paper. You will have seen that the statutory functions that NIBSC and the British Pharmacopoeia have are supported directly by this. I should say that to have a laboratory in an agency is not a given. There are quite a number of agencies which do not have laboratories or smaller scale laboratories. It's certainly unique to have the global leader on biological standardization in the agency. And I should also say that it is not a given that a pharmacopoeia is actually part of an agency. In other jurisdictions, they may or may not be part of the agency and be completely independent. So this is one of the strengths of the agency. That is just as a side note. What we are doing is the laboratory research is something which supports patient health and access to medicines directly or indirectly. So a lot of the work that, for example, the National Institute for Biological Standards and Control are doing could go completely unnoticed by the public. Obviously, that is not our intention. So we have a dedicated committee which is looking at how we can make known to the public what we are doing and also to scientific stakeholders out there. What I should say, and then I think I can open up to questions, that we have with our fit for purpose laboratories where we support an end-to-end process that is very adaptable. We have been able to respond very rapidly also with our expertise that our experts have to public health emergencies. I think very prominent, obviously the COVID-19 pandemic, but also other areas. So we call this in the paper our Swiss Army knife approach to biological science, because it's a very versatile tool. And the research that the colleagues at NIBSC and also for the Pharmacopoeia are doing is directly supporting also their capabilities to react quickly. So research is not something that is nice to have. It is part of the statutory functions of the Institute and directly supports this. So you will have seen that there are a number of activities that have emerged from this. So for example, NIBSC has been part of a UK biotech consortium for identification of COVID-19 antibody therapy candidates. A novel oral polio type 2 vaccine was developed, which is very important because these vaccines that are currently under development cannot revert back to wild type, to a pathogenic virus, so they cannot induce polio whatsoever. They're completely different. And obviously we have had a number of additional work where we again applied the capabilities. So for example, wastewater samples from London were looked at during different phases of the pandemic. And we could see very clearly that the cause of the pandemic and the infections is also preceded or accompanied by changes in the sewage. So that is not infectious virus. I should say this very clearly. This is just genetic materials, and a lot of people are afraid of that. So this is genetic material, but it's some sort of a footprint that you can use to actually look at this in greater detail. So what we are asking of the board is, since we would like to exploit these capabilities much better than we are currently doing, is that we would want to work on a laboratory strategy, which basically helps us to not do this reactively and based on individual collaborations that we have. They're also important, but to do this in a much more strategic approach that is coherent and will also feed into the agency's overarching scientific strategy. So maybe I close here. And Chair, if I may hand over to Professor David Webb, who may also have a few remarks. Thank you.
Yeah, well, thank you. Christian, I absolutely love the description of Swiss Army knife. I think it just shows it's quite a nice way of describing a really unique capability that we have at NIBSC and in our laboratory research. So I like that very much. But David, do you want to just carry on the conversation around communications in particular?
Yeah, so thank you, Stephen. Thank you, Christian. It's a really useful report. So I have the pleasure of chairing the NIBSC Scientific Advisory. So I get the benefit of hearing about this amazing laboratory science on at least twice yearly basis. And it's really helpful to see it all laid out here. First of all, to address the overall question, I do think it's absolutely right we establish an agency laboratory strategy and align that with the regulatory science strategy to strengthen both of these activities. But as you point out, I'd like to focus here on the communication plans mentioned in recommendation 4.1. And if we go back to the executive summary, point 1.3 says, the vision is to ensure the work of the laboratories is better communicated, not only to patients and patient bodies, but also to clinicians. And I would really strongly endorse that. And that's what I'd like to talk about for a minute or two. So it's clear that NIBSC does amazing work. It not only ensures the safety of biological medicines in the UK and beyond, but it also creates at least 90% of the standards globally for WHO. It has a day job that involves batch release and routine work, but NIBSC is able to pivot very rapidly to deal with major emergencies like Ebola, Zika, and now, of course, the pandemic COVID-19. And it still does that while it keeps the plates spinning and continues with that essential day job. All of this work is world leading. When you take that together more broadly with what MHRA has done in terms of being the first to license the AstraZeneca and Pfizer BioNTech vaccines globally, CPRD has been doing in terms of vaccine safety, the MHRA clinical trials unit has done in supporting a series of platform trials, most notably Recovery, which has led already to the identification of 2 drugs that save lives, dexamethasone and tocilizumab. It's really clear that what the MHRA family does is world leading and often not widely known to the public. So for the first time, I think I've noticed since the pandemic that some of my colleagues in medicine have a vague idea what MHRA does. And I would say most doctors have little idea what MHRA does, but it's gaining recognition from clinicians, it's gaining recognition from the public for what it's done. And I say this because I think it's time to bring the power of our broader agency communications team, not just as is mentioned in the paper, the NIBS Communication Management Group, which has a much narrower remit, but to use the agency comms to put major work into getting the message of what MHRA family does now. We need to build awareness of the work at CPRD, MHRA and NIBSC, and I think this is something that really can't wait. There's a fantastic opportunity at this moment to speak more broadly about what we do. And it shouldn't be in a forward plan, it's something that should be implemented urgently. And I close by saying, we're going to talk about patient engagement and patient involvement, and that is crucial. But we would be very well served if we first build patient awareness and clinician awareness. That will help us build both recognition and interest in the work that MHRA does and make it much easier for us to recruit people who understand a little about the work of MHRA and want to know more to engage and get involved in our work. I'll close there, but I think this is a crucial remit that we're currently missing.
Yeah. Okay. I think that's very helpful, David. Actually, June, can I just bring you in, because obviously I know you understand the importance of communication. Thinking about our delivery plan for next year, there's going to be a very specific objective around communication. Do you want to give David some assurance on how important you see this?
Oh, thank you, David. You've said it perfectly. It is so important that the awareness is there, really for the trust and confidence of the public and healthcare professionals, but more because we need the input from the public and can rely on healthcare professionals when we issue new advice. So the timing is right. I was never more pleased than when I heard one of the government broadcasts saying about the COVID-19 vaccines, MHRA approved. And if that is going to be our imprimatur of reliability, of high standards of science, and of delivery in a timely way, then we already have a standard to reach. But it is right, Chair, as you say, that we start to prepare to build on all of this. It shouldn't just be for those who are having a vaccine. It is for everyone having a device as part of their treatment or pathway or a medicine to feel engaged. And this conversation has been a spin-off from the brilliant world-leading work that NIBS does. I know that the polio team have a sign in their office, I am eradicating polio. Now, that's the sort of thing that will inspire everyone with the aspirations we have, because we need to work with everyone to deliver them and to live up to them. So let's make that commitment that we will start to deliver a common strategy that makes MHRA part of everyone's professional and personal lives, and that the key imprimatur will be safety, confidence, and a learning system that gives you the best evidence as soon as we have it. So that's a challenge. We're more than up for it, and I'm glad to start absolutely now.
Okay, thank you, June. David, do you want to come back on that?
Just one small point, and it wasn't in June's talk, it was in yours. It was about putting it into the delivery plan for next year. I think it should be in the delivery plan, or a plan that starts right now, not next year.
Well, next year starts in 2 weeks, David, so that's not too far away. So it's the next financial year, not the next calendar year. So give us 2 weeks, please. Okay, Anthony, I think you want to come in with a comment from the ODR, the Organisational Development and Remuneration Committee.
Yeah, I just wanted to give a bit of assurance to David, because we had a look at the development plan and we looked at exactly this issue during that discussion. And one of the things we discussed with the team, and I know they've taken back on, is not just thinking about MHRA as a regulator, but the communication of the new one agency and the role of each element, so the laboratory scientists through to CPRD, and where they play a role. And using the COVID example, we can do that very, very well. We have real life stories and we can show the role of everybody through that journey. And I know it's something that they've taken back and are actively acting on. So I just wanted to give you a bit of assurance from that perspective.
Great, okay. Mercy, you've been waiting very patiently. Would you like to make a contribution?
I have, but the other inputs were really useful for me. So really just to kind of build on that and give maybe some practical examples as well. So certainly taking the scientific stuff, and I attended that scientific advisory committee meeting and was incredibly impressed and proud of what the MHRA was doing, and excited for the public as well. And I think they really do need to know, because it's not just about raising awareness of what we do, but it's also for the education of the public about how we do it. So it's on transparency and confidence as well. And so some suggestions really about how you can use this kind of innovation around science and promote it to the public is to work with health charities and research charities as well. And as Anthony was saying, you know, those good news stories, what was the role of the MHRA in those good news stories as well? So I think you can really build things up, and health charities in particular are good at getting briefings into magazines, feature articles, you know, not just this kind of scientific press that we kind of usually go for. It is that general awareness that we need to do and build up those relationships with good reporters as well, who will come to us for comment and other issues. But certainly a lot of good, really good scientific work that needs to be promoted, I think, to the general public.
Yeah, okay, I think that's, again, very much an endorsement there, Mercy, so thank you for that. Michael, have you got a related point, or is it something different? Still haven't quite heard you yet, Michael.
Yeah, it's a slightly different point, Stephen, for me. Just for Christian to say is I very much support the strategy. I spent my question what my advice to Christian is, I think it's really, really important at this point in the evolution of the agency that the strategy focuses on long-term resilience and what we need to have in place to ensure that, because it's not just today, tomorrow. I think we're looking 10 years ahead of and what type of laboratory capability we want and how that features on a global stage. The other question I've got really to Christian is this. You see mixed messages in the media. On the one hand, the response to COVID, the emphasis has been about global partnership. But on the other hand, we also hear about latent nationalism and people going it alone. And I just wondered, Christian, what do you see happening in the world in the future? Because I think that influences our strategy. We are a centre of excellence. People come to us. We've got that to build on. But is there also a risk that other countries may want to do something similar? So it's a question mark. How do we position ourselves? This may be for the strategy, Christian, rather than now, but it's an area that I'm particularly interested in.
Christian, do you want to just respond to that?
Yes, thanks, of course. So thanks for supporting the strategy. Indeed, I fully agree. And this is why a laboratory strategy actually looks at the facilities and the hardware that we have, and how we make best use of that hardware. And that is obviously something which also has very strongly the long-term resilience in it, because indeed scientific equipment is expensive and will continue to be expensive, and we have to do our best in order to do this sustainably. So that is indeed on our radar. Then on the other question, very important, obviously. So NIPSC is a very collaborative body, and so is the British Pharmacopoeia, I would say. So we would rather go for a collaboration. So with the World Health Organization, for example, into which we are feeding very actively. So as you might know, we are designated to create biological standards for the WHO. We make more than 90% of them. And this is why it is difficult to say what other countries and jurisdictions would be doing in this area. Because basically, if there is already an international standard, there is no point in making another international standard. Maybe there is a local standard. And of course, that is something which is not as necessarily at odds with the international standard, as long as there's traceability towards the kind of highest order international standard that mainly comes from NIBSC. But it is, of course, correct that there might be some fluidity in this in the future, indeed.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Just thinking of that, could I maybe just, sorry, Sam, just to jump onto you, but just thinking about the benefit that our laboratory research has to some of our regulatory processes. I know you've been responsible for the British Pharmacopoeia. What benefit do you see of the lab research actually helping with the regulatory processes, just for people's understanding?
Thanks very much, Stephen, and thanks for the opportunity just to comment on this. I mean, the strategy is really key to our future regulation. I think it crosses the almost the entire life cycle, if you consider it, really, because obviously the standard setting is key to what comes onto our market. But there's another element which we haven't perhaps touched on that much, which is some of the MHRA lab activities, which are really key to I guess the safety of the supply in the UK. So I say that it's also quite key to global activities. So we have over the years played quite an active role, for example, in terms of helping identify defective medicines and working out why they're defective, and actually providing that scientific expertise and skill set which other countries perhaps don't have. I say it's not really that recent, but a few years ago we had quite an issue with cough medicine in Pakistan, for example, and we provided a huge amount of support to Pakistan colleagues and the wider regulatory landscape. So I think we have to consider this as how does it help the pathway in the UK, but actually how does it help the regulatory landscape across the globe, because we have a really key part to play in clearly obviously setting standards during the research and the like, but also actually protecting the supply chain and supporting others to support global public health. So I think there's quite a broad role there, and we probably shouldn't lose sight of all of those elements.
Yeah, thank you, Sam. Sorry just to pounce on you there, but I just felt it's important because having been to Teddington and seen the labs there and understanding how it fits in with our other work. I know the paper clearly references that, Christian. It's not a criticism, but I think the work on laboratory research is really very, very broad, and I think actually it's yet more reason why we should take a strategic approach to it. So I'm fully supportive of that. Actually, Barbara, can I bring you into the conversation, please?
Yes, I've been listening with interest to this, and I agree with everything that others have said. I think one of the things about the laboratory services, and particularly NIBSC, is it does work throughout the life cycle of a medicine or a vaccine or any new invention for medical use in the pharmaceutical area. And that's because right from the beginning, when people are considering manufacturing a new substance and testing it, NIBSC is there to give them standards for their research before there's ever a standard for worldwide use, so that people know that their innovative medicine, which they're manufacturing in-house, is safe, that it has the right stuff in it, and it's the same content and safety every time it's used in the clinical trials. And this helps us to be very quick in the UK turning around research. Also, when there's a question about a medicine, and we've seen it with the COVID vaccines, the UK is very quick off the mark because of the very good genetics and pharmaceutical work that they do, particularly at NIBSC and the other Teddington laboratory. We can tell straight away if there's enough RNA in a new RNA vaccine, and if the RNA has the right message in it as well. And we can stop or start using something with assurance that we're not making a snap judgment. And I think this is really important, and other people value it too.
Great. Okay, well, thank you, Barbara. Appreciate that contribution. Mandy, I'll bring you in.
Thanks, Stephen, and thanks, Christian, for putting this together. I absolutely agree with everything that's been said. I think one of the things that came out very clearly was how you've highlighted the regulatory role of a science strategy. So I think that's sometimes quite difficult to understand. So having come from industry, regulators were about approving drugs and pharmacovigilance. I think as we get more biological medicines, and the COVID pandemic has raised that awareness, the complexity is quite a step change. So, and what we're doing with, as Barbara said, innovative ways of bringing medicines to market, standards become absolutely key. And to reduce the wasted effort by understanding the science early on becomes part of the regulatory process. So I think how we communicate the importance of science and what CPR are doing, digital science as well, into the regulatory process is going to be very important for us. Yeah. And I think to have that, we need that strategy to help us plan for the future. So I would absolutely support that. But we also need to tell the exciting stories about how science relates to regulation. Yeah. And I think the wastewater was picked up in the papers quite a few months ago. But I'm not sure whether it got as much traction, but I think we have to go for those things that really underpin. You can't just tick things off. Regulation is changing, and I think we need to get that message over, that this is scientifically based and can be trusted.
That's great. Okay, Sam, do you want to come back in on that?
Thanks. I just wanted to comment a little bit on what Mandy's saying, and I totally agree with where Mandy's coming from, but it really strikes me that we're sort of distinguishing between biological and chemical, I guess, and I think the beauty of what we have is everything together, and actually the strength of what we have is all of those expertise and being able to perform the tests across the board, because COVID, yes, is one area, but one of the other big areas that we've had recently, of course, is the nitrosamine impurities, which has actually been an issue for quite a large number of products, and actually, again, a global problem. So, you know, without the expertise of the laboratory staff that we have and the scientists and the like, and indeed the colleagues in the organisation, you know, we wouldn't necessarily have seen all of that. But I do think that a lot of it comes down to working together across the organisation, whether that's between laboratories and the regulatory centre, or indeed between the two laboratories themselves, where we've equally seen some really great successes in terms of identifying problems and being the world lead.
Yeah, so that breadth gives us an ability to respond to different situations easily, doesn't it? So, Christian, I'm just conscious of time, but do you want to have the last word on this before I ask for decisions from the board?
Thanks. Well, indeed, just to resonate with what Sam just said, I think that there's obviously a distinction between biologicals and chemicals, but strategically there isn't. And also in future, when you look at what is in the pipeline, there are many chemicals which are as targeting as biologicals are. So I I hope that this also came across well enough in my presentation in the beginning, because obviously the BP labs, the Teddington labs are key to the agency, and so is NIPS. So to have these combined within one strategy, I think would be very welcome. And thanks for the support to board colleagues.
Okay, I see we're running out of time. So have you got a 10-second comment, and then we can go to a vote?
Yes, very quick. I applaud everything that's in the paper. I would also like to be very clear about what we're not going to do, what we're going to stop, because often in these strategies we expand, and I think we should be very clear about prioritisation. Yeah,
I think I completely support that. So, okay, I'm just conscious of time, colleagues. So we've been asked on page 23 to, we requested for the board to support the establishment of a laboratory strategy. So from the comments around the table, I'm assuming that's a yes. Yeah, I'm here. Thumbs up. That's great. Okay, so I think, Christian, thank you for that. I think we should absolutely establish an agency laboratory strategy. I think my only comment would be just be careful that we don't get confused and have 25 different strategies, because I know we've got a regulatory science strategy, there's a science strategy, and there's something else as well. So just let's be really clear and make sure that these things link, but absolutely we should have an agency laboratory strategy. So Natalie should note that as approved. There's also quite a lot of conversation about the communications. And I think it is going to be part of our delivery plan in 2 weeks' time, David. But I'm just wondering whether the board will be interested in having a specific paper on our communication strategy, at a convenient point in the future. I'm not sure, maybe 3 months or something of that order. Would that be helpful? Does one people? I'm seeing a thumbs up from Mercy at least. Yeah, thumbs up. Because I think actually it gives a deliverable. Otherwise, it just goes into the ether, and I think it's such a valuable discussion that we had. I don't think it's just about always giving good news either. I think we want the public to be reassured that we will take difficult decisions if necessary, as well as actually also promoting the good activities that the agency is involved in. So it's around trust, it's around credibility, it's around certainty and robust decision making. I think that's they're some of the things I think we need to be thinking about. So as well as just promoting the good things that we do. So that would be my perspective. But I think maybe June, just check with you, but say 3 months for a communication strategy to come back to the board, because we hopefully will have started actually doing things by then.
I would say within, because I think there's a lot of good thinking already about how to exploit the current opportunity with the COVID awareness, build on that across all our activities, to use new partnerships and to use new modalities and media. And it will mean a complete change in approach, because if we are going to be one agency, proactive, agile, and interlinked with others, we've got to show it by the way we communicate. So I would hope, Chair, I won't give a date now, but I would have hoped in the next 1 or 2 months we will have something at least as an impactful step today.
Okay, I heard 2 months, so that's fine. But my selective hearing again, June, sorry. But that's great, we'll come back to that, but I think we can just record that as an action, Natalie, please, for the communication strategy to come back to the board. Okay, thank you very much, Christian, and to Mark and the rest of the team that helped put this together. So if we can move on now, please, on to the impact of EU transition. This was actually an action from a previous meeting where we actually talked about EU transition in January, and we asked for an update in 2 months, so hence that's why this paper has been put together. Sam, you can assume the paper's been read, but do you want to make any sort of top line comments, and then we'll go straight to questions?
Yes, sorry, I was on mute. Thanks very much, Chair. That's very kind of you to provide the introduction. So the paper is very much around the impacts of the end of the EU transition period, and obviously, as you've just highlighted, then it's really a bit of an update following an earlier paper. So firstly, I'd just like to say thanks to colleagues across the organisation for helping to pull this together, because it's quite a broad-reaching paper, as you'll see. But obviously, at the end of the transition period, we had a partnership agreement which was reached between the UK and the EU. There are some areas that that are still, I guess, deferred. For example, FMD, so the Falsified Medicines Directive work, and there's bits that are obviously on standstill, like the devices, and we have a bit more time to think about those. We also have the Northern Ireland Protocol, which has come into force, which impacts the way in which we're operating, and indeed we're managing supply with the NIP as well. So a lot of work still ongoing. So while it's a 2-month update, I would say it's still very much a very high focus for the organisation. And we're certainly still trying to work to maintain our global position, I think. And as part of that, there's a variety of different things that have come into play. And we had a paper on the innovative licensing process at the last board meeting. But the paper talks very much around the impact of that over the first couple of months, and there are some helpful statistics in the annex. You'll see that national applications, broadly speaking, are still maintaining quite high volumes. The reliance route we're seeing starting to gain a bit of traction. We are actually getting a number of applications through that, as indeed we are for ILAP as well, the innovative licensing route, which I believe is now 13 as of today, so a slight increase from what the paper has highlighted. The areas that I guess we're seeing some impact as well in terms of uptake and things, so the innovation area, clinical trials remains very high with around 100 applications every year, which is great. And we also have still a relatively high demand for scientific advice, again, very positive to see that. There's clearly opportunities going forward for the future for us, and we continue to support the government's very ambitious vision and agenda for us, and that includes a number of different things, but really still continuing to drive the innovation while also maintaining our mature and generic products on the market as well. Very much still keen to be having the patient right at the centre of everything we do, and that clearly is now seen within the delivery plan as well, and seen as that forward-thinking regulator, and one that really does collaborate across the piece. And I think the opportunities that the current situation affords really does lend itself to all of those different areas. So again, some opportunities for us to consider. There's quite a lot of areas still in focus at the moment that we're still trying to resolve through negotiations, and I say we are, the department and others are certainly doing that, and we're working with them. But the Northern Ireland Protocol, as I mentioned earlier, has some areas where we're still having quite some fruitful discussions about how that will progress. Qualified persons for pharmacovigilance and batch testing are equally areas of discussion at the moment, and I think going forwards, really, we just have to continue to support those discussions, really work on meeting the agenda that's been set for us in terms of the drive for innovation, encourage those new routes to market, and as part of that, I'm really quite keen to see, as we talked about at the last board meeting, very much a catalogue in terms of our services and products for authorisation of products to the UK market. So that will also form part of that bigger picture now that we have the opportunity to do that. So I think they're broadly the headlines, Chair. I mean, I don't really want to go into too much more detail, but I'd rather leave opportunity for discussion. I hope that covers.
Yeah, that's very helpful. I think I think your point is that it's very clearly made that this is not finished. This is still very much work in progress. So, and I think we asked for an update, and this is an appropriate update. But there's still a lot of work to be done by a lot of people, I think it's fair to say. Greg, can I just maybe come to you first, if that's okay? Because I know you had a number of questions, but could I maybe just ask you to ask one, and then we can pick the others on another occasion?
Of course. Thanks very much, Stephen. Thanks, Sam. Yeah, perhaps then I might ask about paragraph 218 of the paper, and really just, I suppose, just to ask Sam for her impression of the practical implications and consequences that might arise or begin to arise from the lack of information sharing that is highlighted there. I mean, is it your impression? Is it the executive team's impression that that's going to become a building issue over the year? At what point would you hope these new information sharing agreements would be in place? So that some of the risks that we can well understand might be mitigated or avoided. Really just to get Sam's perspective on how she feels that's developing. Thank you, Stephen.
Sam, do you want to come back on that?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's worth saying that it's very much, you know, early days at this point. It's undoubtedly going to be a challenge, and there's also significant resource issues that really sort of fall under that, I guess, to a point. But we continue to work together to strengthen international relationships and to make up for some of, I guess, some of the loss of that work sharing. And there are certainly opportunities, I think, going forwards. And as we just said, you know, this is a work in progress. It's something that we just have to continue to work on. But I think there are opportunities to improve things. And I guess, you know, it's not just devices, it's medicines as well. And I think, you know, we have had very good relationships in the past, and we just have to try and build on those in the sides. But yeah, I think it's watch this space, but we're moving in the right direction. Thanks.
Okay. Oh, thank you for that, Sam. David, can I bring you in, please?
Yeah, thank you very much. So, well, one of my questions just follows on from that. The delay between PRAC meetings and the minutes appearing. Clearly, that important decisions may be made in Europe that we wouldn't know about until the minutes come out. There's a risk of being blindsided, and I just wondered whether you could enlighten me on that before I ask another small question.
Okay. June, did you want to respond to that?
Thank you. If I can quickly come in, because as Sam has said, this is an evolving picture, but what we have done through the COVID links is actually achieved very open real-time communication. And I'm sure I can say that our team will be at PRAC this week. It's either today or it might be Thursday. They will be working together. And I think the really good information flows that we've achieved on safety over the years are still there, but we need to make sure we, if you like, put them on a more formal footing beyond COVID. So I think, I hope I can assure everyone that we're on the case with this, but it is definitely in the spotlight now through COVID, and those relationships are very effective, and a needs-related sharing of information happens day by day. So when there's something serious, then we're, you know, in frequent daily communication, and our assessors have a voice. So you know, the science that we will be rigorously looking at will be part of, in this instance, EU total review. So
I think that's helpful, actually.
It's moving, as Sam has said, but it is, you know, we live in the real world here, and patient safety comes first.
And just for the members of the public watching, can you just tell me what PRAC means?
The Pharmacovigilance Risk Assessment Committee, and it's the parallel to our Pharmacovigilance Expert Advisory Group, which the Commission on Human Medicines oversees, and in the same way, it's the Committee for Human Medicinal Products in the EU. So it's colleague to colleague, if you like, and it's a very much a needs-based but very intuitive and on-the-ball communication.
Yeah, no, that's great. Thank you. David, I think you had a second question you wanted to ask?
Yes, I mean, this one is sort of slightly broader for Sam. I mean, I was worrying or wondering about whether the UK registration hurdle might limit the offer of some devices to the UK. And I suppose my question is, how would we know? When would we know? And what are we monitoring? What signals are we looking for? I know this is time of flux, but we need to be kind of monitoring, and I'd like to know how that's, a little bit about how that's done, not in detail.
Sam, can you come back on that?
Thanks very much. Well, there's an awful lot going on with the registries at the moment, and obviously you'll see the numbers that potentially could come through to us. And I know the team are working very hard in terms of trying to identify what's on the market. It is a challenge, is the honest answer. You know, it's not an easy thing because of the previous regulatory system. So I think going forwards with the new approaches and the way that we can actually use the registrations, it will mean that, or registry, sorry, it will mean that we have a better understanding of what's on the market. It's probably not a great answer for your question, to be honest, at this point, because again, it's work in progress. And I think that the team are working very hard really to try and identify what is out there and how we will get those measures in place. I mean, there's a big amount of work really trying to understand how we put in place the new regulatory system, and this will form part of that. So
I think possibly there's also, to David's question, I think there's maybe also a need to improve our intelligence gathering so that we've got some idea of what's happening in other countries. Not necessarily, we can't force companies to register their products or have their products authorised for use in the UK. That's clearly a company decision. But if we can ensure that our environment is attractive for companies to have their products authorised in the UK, that's actually our measure. And so maybe there's a piece of intelligence gathering we need to think about, perhaps. So, okay. Christian, you've got a hand up. Would you like to make a contribution?
Oh, sorry, that was a legacy hand. Sorry, Chairman.
Oh, legacy hand. Okay. Anthony. Oh, sorry, June. Can I come to you, June? Sorry, you're on mute.
Another aspect to the paper that Sam's hopefully put together is that we make it as easy as possible. I think the technological basis for making companies not have particularly challenging effort to put their devices on the register is a real key part of this. And I think maybe John Q might like to say a little bit about that, but we're really trying to make this simple.
Yeah. John, is there something you want to add in terms of making life easy for our industry colleagues?
Thank you. I mean, I think it's worth saying that the 11 or so platforms and systems we put in place for the 1st of January is the start of the process. By virtue of pace, they are quite simple.
Yep.
Feedback from industry and the users has been really positive thus far. I mean, people are saying that the approach that we took around service design, user experiences is starting to pay off. But absolutely building on June's point, I think the next phase, that there is that real opportunity to simplify and make those systems smart. So you're kind of taking the pain away from users, but giving them control at the same time. So that, I think that's the next phase. But I think as Sam has outlined, we're kind of still working through those requirements, so we don't waste any effort. We need them documented so we can move.
Yeah. Okay, that's helpful. And obviously the whole reason for wanting to do this is to ensure that patients in the UK can benefit from new devices and new medicines at the earliest possible opportunity. That's got to be the rationale for wanting to do this. So Sam, did you want to come back on this?
Yeah, please, if you don't mind, Chairman. So I just sort of pondering on this. I mean, I think the other element of this, which perhaps is away from registries, is market surveillance. And much with medicines, we will be doing more market surveillance of devices. So, it's not just a one track. It's a multi-pronged approach to really both scrutinise the registries, but also look at the market surveillance and other activities. So we are putting resource into this area, and I think it'd be interesting to see where we get to over the coming months.
No, that's helpful. Thank you, Anthony. Question from you?
It's more a comment, really, and funny enough, it builds on the point that has just been discussed. In the recommendations, one of the things that I would like to see added into that area is, given the change programme and the financial challenges we're facing, I would really like to see what, I applaud the work we've done on ILAT, and I think we've been so focused on delivering the new technological advances for device submission, but the existing regulatory processes, I think as part of this recommendation, we can't just wait to see what the companies and how they will adapt their regulatory strategies. I think we need to be really thinking about what we're going to do, and is there some new methodology and regulatory. It goes back to that point that Mandy raised, why aren't we all following, why doesn't everything do by ILAT? And it slightly reads this way, that we'll carry on doing what we've done. And I know that's not in your mind, Sam, but I think it's very clear in the recommendations that we're investigating how we can be more innovative in all areas, and also how we can look at the financial implications.
Yeah, I don't think you need to be convinced on that, do you, Sam?
No, not at all. So just to reassure you, Anthony, I mean, I'm doing a bit of work at the moment with various colleagues around the agency, looking at the modelling for the future way. So looking at what the fees are, looking at the income versus actually the cost of doing the different units of fee, if that makes sense. And also as part of that larger piece of work, looking at the catalogue, which I mentioned earlier, about making sure that we have a catalogue of products and services. And when I talk about products and services, I'm talking about access routes to market, both for medicines and devices. So the ILAP absolutely forms part of that, and yes, it may be that it's an evolved version of that that actually allows you know, the majority of products to come down that line, but maybe entering at different points along the pathway, depending on the level of risk, or indeed I guess whether it's novel or mature, for example. So there's a lot to be done, I think, but it's going in absolutely the right direction. And at the moment, we're trying to operationalise ILAP into more of a BAU system, and by doing that, we need to really look at those other routes to market and make sure that it makes sense and that it's actually understandable from an external perspective, and it really presents a really nice offer. Yeah. And fundamentally that we've got the right resource, the skill set, and we can do it in an affordable way. So all of that is being pulled together, and absolutely I agree it needs to be looked at, but it's top of my priority at the moment.
Okay, I think that's helpful. Okay, I'm just conscious of time, but Barbara, do you want to have the last 10-second comment?
Yes, thank you. It's related to the discussion, and it's about the desire we have to make the MHRA more streamlined and to modernise it. Is there evidence emerging yet as to whether these new ways of doing devices and medicines registration and licensing will reduce costs to us, or will the input that we have to put in cost us more, and will there be more or less burden on the staff?
Okay, is there a quick response to that, Sam? Because I think that's probably a long conversation.
No, I can give you a fairly succinct response to that. So I'm very keen to make sure that, that, as I say, things are affordable. Now, by doing that, you need to ensure that the level of effort that goes in is appropriate, both from a financial point of view, but also from obviously the risk and the public health perspective, to make sure that you're doing the right level of assessment. But you know, there are ways of doing that, and I want to look at the grade mix and the oversight by different levels, for example, and the level of input at for different access routes as well. So for example, a reliance route needs obviously far less than perhaps the full national route. So we need to have a look at that and do a little bit more granular work, I think. But absolutely, it will hopefully result in that more efficient process that still gives the right sort of end result of quality, safety and efficacy with assessments.
Yeah, efficiency and risk proportionality, so it will be the
Absolutely.
key words, I think. So I think that's clear. Okay, so certainly there were 4 recommendations were made to bring conclusion to the areas of uncertainty in relation to EU discussion. That's ongoing. But Catherine, I won't ask you to contribute, but that's something we definitely need your help on, you know, within the department. Advocating new routes to market to facilitate early patient access to medicines, that's something that's been a feature of this discussion. Continuing regular interaction with industry and closely continuing to monitor the volume and pattern of work, because I think we'll need that to achieve the efficiency that Sam was just talking about. So can I ask everyone just to endorse that as recommendations? I'm seeing thumbs up, so I will say that's fantastic. So thank you very much, Sam. I appreciate your time, and thank you to all the colleagues in the agency who are doing so much work on this. It's very much appreciated. So we just need to move on to the next item, which is about the proposed outcomes from the new patient and public involvement strategy and how they're going to be achieved. So we've talked to patients a lot through this. This is a strategy that we've been talking about for some time. So Mercy, would you like to make some introductory comments? You can assume we've read the report, but I think your perspective would be helpful.
Yeah, thank you, Stephen. I want to thank John Hopkins and Rachel Bosworth really for not just putting together this paper, but also taking on my comments on it as well. So obviously we're trying to get a roadmap with some milestones to deliver this strategy. Part of it, of course, is about the systematic engagement and involvement across the agency of patients. You know, the background is the Independent Medicines and Medical Devices Safety Review and our response to it. We also did a survey with over 800 responses. But the strategy also builds on the not just the Cumberledge review, but also the last 18 months that the agency has been developing and building on this strategy. And it's really important that we do continue to deliver this in a way that is measurable and effective. So it came to it has been through the Patient Group Consultative Forum, and it came to the Patient Safety Engagement Committee, and we were particularly keen on having very clear outcomes from the strategy that can be measured. And also learning from other health partners in the UK and abroad. Because as we know, one size does not fit all of whom we want to engage and on what. So by learning from others, it's really an efficient use of our time and our resource. Also, it doesn't overburden patients and the public because they're responding all the time to different agencies asking them different things, and where we can coordinate that, it's better. I would also just say my remarks that if we want to deliver across the agency in an effective way, it really is important to coordinate and give expertise. So I think the idea of a central hub perhaps is essential to provide assurance and delivery. And then I'm going to move on to Rachel, who has specific questions for us.
Rachel.
Thanks very much, Mercy. So I thought it might be helpful to just suggest 3 areas that the board might particularly like to focus on in discussion. And those very much build on some of the feedback we got from the Patient Safety and Engagement Committee. So the first one I wanted to draw your attention to was the outcome framework, which we've developed as a result of the discussion at the committee. And we'd really welcome the board's views on whether these feel like the right outcomes that we should be aiming for, and whether you'd be content with to move ahead with this framework. Secondly, you'll see from the paper that we're intending to build a more representative patient forum, and also making sure that the insight gathered in the agency is shared both internally and with partners. And recognising, as Mercy said, many patients are consulted with and engaged by many organisations. We really want to take forward a partnership approach, and looking at how we can collaborate more and drive collaboration across multiple partnerships. And we've already had some initial discussions about that. And then thirdly, again, looking internally, we'd like to ask for the board's support of the approach to really embedding patient and public engagement and involvement across the agency, and getting to a position where every member of staff thinks about the patient perspective in the decisions that they're making. So really embedding in our culture.
Right, okay. Well,
grateful for any thoughts.
So if we can just take those one at a time. In terms of the outcomes, Rachel, can I just check you're talking about the flow charts on page 39 and page 39 and 37, I think it is, isn't it?
Yes, that's right.
So you talk about public patients, reporting patients, and engaged patients, specific outcomes for different types of individuals.
Yes, absolutely.
So can I just ask, Bruce, so it's an area of expertise of yours, so you make the first comment?
2 comments, really. One is, and I'm sorry if this is a disappointing thing to say, I think it was great the way that the different types of patient engagement are defined in the paper for the board. But I'm afraid I sensed a sort of lack of synergy between that and the attached strategy. One sort of felt they'd been developed separately, and I felt there was a bit of a disconnect between the way that the 2 were presented, which we can perhaps discuss another time. A hobby horse of mine, as you know, Stephen, and something I'm writing about, is this whole business of outcomes, that almost all the outcomes are assessing ways in which individuals will feel valued and involved and informed. And to me, they are missing the general societal impact this exercise might have. That, it's all very well, perhaps just involving it ethically, philosophically, we all think this is a good thing to do, and assessing that may be an outcome in itself. But what this doesn't seem to be doing is to looking at the way that the contributions patients and the public make actually influence our decisions. I mean, could they potentially be harmful? Forgive me for being argumentative, but that's what you do for any medicine or device. And so some way of measuring what the consequences of their involvement are, what effect they're having on our decisions, and therefore, could we do it better? And that is the most difficult aspect, and I think that's why it's missing.
Rachel, do you want to respond briefly to that?
Yeah, thanks. I think that's very helpful. I'm certainly happy to go and have another look at that area. I do think that you know, one of the challenges with outcomes is how we come up with things that we can measure and we can evidence outcomes. And you know, societal impact is notoriously difficult to measure, but we can have a look at whether there's anything we can build in. I mean, and to your point, Bruce, about looking at how patient contributions influence our decision. One of the things we've been looking at, for example, is through our decision-making processes, actually being more transparent about the information we've received from patients, what considerations have been made, and how those inputs from patients have influenced the decisions that have been made, and then publishing those. So there is a more transparent link between the involvement that we have from patients and the decisions that are made as a result of that, and with the benefit of that information.
Yeah, I think it's
also happy to look at that.
Yeah, I think there's always a danger, Rachel, of analysis paralysis and taking so long to try and work out what the measure is that we don't do anything. And I think actually sometimes you can actually launch into unknown areas and then use examples and case studies to actually help to build you know, a framework by which you can then develop measurement techniques. Because actually this strikes me as something that we need to be moving on forward quickly, as opposed to waiting for 5 years to try and come up with the perfect outcome measure. I know that's not your intention, but...
No, I would agree with that. And I think there are some tangible outcome measures we can introduce straight away. And we should do that and then look to build over time rather than, you know, wait for something that comes along in a few years' time. So our aim would be to very much start and build rather than, you know, spend a lot of time trying to come up with something and not acting.
Yeah, and I think the other point I'd probably pull out of Bruce's comments is around trying to use the three types of patient profiles and apply those to the different objectives that you've set as well. So because actually there could be different activities associated with those different patient groups within those strategic objectives. June, do you want to come in on this?
I do agree with the challenges of measuring impact in terms of the value patients and the public place on what we deliver, but it can be done. And when I think about trying to translate this into the work of every member of staff, we all not just make abstract decisions, but we deliver leaflets. We decide what form you fill in if you're sending in a report. And all of these things, do they meet patients and the public's needs? And I do think we can actually have some really practical measures. If nobody values the leaflet in the box, then we need to change it. And I think a kind of learning system where we have measurable outputs, we look at how they meet needs, and then we change them, will actually drive improvement. Because I think we're starting in some areas from a pretty low baseline, I have to say. We want to have patients involved in that design of services. So I'm trying, while talking in a very conceptual way, to make it very practical. Because we do a lot of things every day, but if they don't meet needs and they aren't geared to what patients and the public want, we're doing it for ourselves. And that is of no use.
No, I agree with that completely, actually. Thank you, June. Michael, can I bring you in, please?
Yeah, I got 2 points. I thought the paper was excellent, but just going to Bruce's point, I think it's important that when we begin to monitor the impact of this and the outcomes, it's not purely defined by patient engagement, because I think what Bruce is getting at as well is that a societal question for me is there good awareness of the MHRA across our constituency? The strong point that David made. Are we trusted to make judgments? And then there's a separate issue around, do we engage with people in the design of our regulatory practices? So there's a spectrum of indicators, and I'd just be a little bit worried if we just focused on one or two because we're looking at patient engagement. They are complementary. And for my previous life, we really focused on awareness and public trust in everything that we did, because they are complementary. So that would be my observation. And my second point is, it's not very clear in the paper about how you're going to bring about the cultural change. So again, the question for me is is it going to be in our promotion? One example, how we promote people, because I've experienced where I've had an excellent professional person and I've not promoted them because they've not been particularly good at client engagement. Are we going to actually make sure that that sort of dilemma is addressed in things like our promotion and our reward? And it's a question for me is what's in it for MHRA people if you really want to change, bring about the cultural change?
Yeah, maybe it's a bit unfair to ask Rachel to comment on that, but maybe June, could I just ask your views in terms of the culture change aspect that Michael's just talked about?
It's vital to this, and thank you for pinpointing it. And it has a spectrum of aspects. I think what we'll be talking about is some figures and drivers that you can't actually license a product without taking into account the views of the patients who'll be using it. And actually the carrots of knowing that those that really make this part of their work will have an easier career progression. I think it's got to be so embedded that in the end we're not even talking in this way, that it is actually part of how we behave and what we do. It's not given to Rachel's group, the layer on the top, as a sort of veneer of acceptability to the public. It's got to be absolutely in the DNA of the organisation. I think the engagement index that would include factors like you've just mentioned, Michael, you know, the level of awareness, the trust, and the design engagement in our services could give us almost a barometer that you could almost have on your mental wall. My decision is patient focused because we're driving it up in the same way as we look at staff engagement, really periodically, whether you say, stay and strive. Do they say good things about us? Do they stay with us? And do they put their passion into what we're doing? And it's exactly that kind of thing in our DNA.
Yeah, I think that's very helpful, June. Mandy, I saw you nodding furiously during most of Michael's comments. Is there something else you want to add to that?
Yes, I think it's building on what Bruce has said. Patient engagement needs to be for a purpose, and it needs to make patients safer, more efficacious drugs, and have a societal benefit. I think our partnerships are also key in terms of real world evidence is the way we design clinical trials. So building on June's point, you can't get an approval unless you've got a trial which has brought patient views during that phase. So we can outsource, if you like, some of those things because it's in our process. So it becomes part of how we do our processes. And I think for me, that was missing a little bit in the paper. So, and I just think also opportunities with partnerships. So I had my COVID jab on Friday. So I looked at the little card I got, which was a Public Health England card. So I felt a bit woozy in the evening. And I did go to yellow card. It was tricky. There was no mention of yellow card on the vaccination card, but there was in the patient information leaflet. Those things are quite tricky. I did it because I was interested to test what we're doing. We need to look for opportunities. It's much easier to report, say, your symptoms on the Zoe app. We need to think about clever partnerships to engage people in a very practical way.
Yeah, I think that's so true, because I think virtually every organisation in the health sector has got patient engagement groups, and there's a lot of duplication going on there. And actually, part of Cumberledge was about joining the system up, and so that patients can tell their story once, and then we share the information amongst ourselves as well. And I think there's a really important component associated with that, and then that links really clearly, Mandy, to joining up things like the vaccination program, and the yellow card is just one example. So I think there's some lessons to be learned there, without question. Mercy, just bringing you back into the conversation. Obviously, you've been sponsoring this particular paper. Is there some extra comment you want to make?
Yeah, no, those were really useful comments. Just on the society issues that Bruce was talking about, it's just that we did social value judgments stuff with NICE, and we learnt a lot about how decisions are made. You think scientifically, but there actually are issues around social judgments that people make intuitively, really, and it was actually trying to separate those out within our committees that was kind of really useful. And we used obviously a mechanism like the Citizens Council, but there are ways of doing this, and again it's about partnership working. So just want to endorse the comments that are kind of coming out really and what more we can kind of learn and use from others. And some of the early patient and public involvement work I did about 20 years ago was with some regulators, and the issue there was about the silent minority as well. When people feel safe and happy, you know, you don't necessarily know about them. So it is about public awareness as well, to know, so people are aware what we do. We're reviewing yellow cards at the next Patient Safety and Engagement Committee, because I agree with Mandy. Yeah. You know, most people don't know about it. You know, I use the Zoe app, and I know that we actually, as the MHRA, use it as well. We get information from it, which is great, but it is much easier to use. So, okay. Yeah. Those issues.
Well, I think there's some lessons to be learned there, man. Mercy, that's very clear. Okay, thank you for that. Anthony, just a quick comment from you, and then a final comment from Barbara.
Yeah, I've got an AOB just initially that I would raise, but we don't have an AOB, and it links to this. I'm really pleased, Stephen, that you've simplified the front pages of the board papers, but the box that said impact for patients and publics has gone. And I think that was actually a key box, because it actually focuses people who are preparing papers to think about what this has on our key customer group. It also does a self-check. You know, they can check, is this a really important thing? But it also shows leadership for the rest of the organisation, that we're taking it at the key of what we do. So I'm proposing that gets to, that we don't have an AOB, so it's the only point I could raise it.
Okay. Well, I think it's a valid point, except that it was never ever filled in correctly. So, to be honest, it was hugely frustrating for me that it was never filled in correctly. So therefore it was adding no value. So therefore I've removed it. I'm very happy to consider putting it back in, but what I will need is a commitment that paper authors will actually seriously consider it. Otherwise, you're ticking a box and you're not making a difference. And that's my issue, Anthony, with it.
No, I think that some people did focus on that and did actually think about what the implications were, but
not from the drafts that I saw.
Okay, perhaps not recently then. But I do think we should give it another go, because I think it shows leadership that it's at the heart of what we're doing. So
I think that point's well made, and let's look at all opportunities to try and achieve that.
So my question on the paper was, I think there's a bit in the partnership, because I concur with everything everybody said, but I think the key level of involvement for patients can actually be that they read what we have produced. And what I didn't see in the partnership element of this strategy was partnership in communication around our decisions, for example. So June, you're right, it's not in the patient information leaflet, but it could be in the NICE clinical guidelines, it could be in the Royal College of Guidance. So I'd just like to see some partnership in communication, Mercy, in that partnership area.
Okay, that's probably helpful. Barbara, last comment from you, and then we'll need to move on.
Yes, it's been very interesting. I particularly like involve, respond. I think inform is in there in another part of our agenda, but it should be part of that. Make culture. Culture is difficult, as you know, and I encountered serious problems with not understanding people's culture when we were doing pandemic flu and other things that required public engagement. Engagement must be two-way. It mustn't be, I'm not doing it because they won't take any notice, or I won't know where my information goes. There's got to be a contextual response when people speak to us. And information should be two-way. We get good information here from people who attend these meetings, but a lot of people aren't confident with writing or expressing themselves in this sort of context. A lot of people can't use media as easily as we can, and I think we don't understand to the extent that this affects people, as well as their own culture.
Okay, now thank you, Barbara. Mercy, go on, you have the last word.
Sorry, I did mean to talk about community engagement, because that is key. So if we want diverse communities and it is mentioned in the paper, but it's actually thinking that through about how it's implemented. And obviously working with people like NICE, who have got a nice guideline on community engagement and on shared decision making as well. You know, we're not doing this alone, so we can work with others.
Okay. So we're asked on page 41 to endorse the high-level strategic objectives. I think there's been some useful context added to some of that during the discussion. But can I just check if board colleagues are content to endorse this strategy? I'm seeing thumbs up, so we can note that as approved then, Natalie, please. We're also asked for approval to seek ministerial sign-off to proceed to a final public consultation. I'm seeing thumbs up for that too. Yeah, it's really important that we do actually consult on this strategy in the widest possible way forward. So we'll clearly need ministerial sign-off for that, but that seems like a very sensible thing to do. So again, I think if we can say that's approved as well, Natalie, please, as well. Okay, we've got one final agenda item. Hopefully this one will be relatively quick. It's about a new Unitary Board conflicts of interest policy. It's a piece of administration that we need to just formally approve. Obviously, there was a conflict of interest policy previously, but it applied to non-executive directors. There was a separate one for executive directors in the civil service. There's different parts of this policy were on expert committee conflicts of interest, on terms of reference. And so what Natalie has very helpfully done is to bring it all together into one Unitary Board conflicts of interest policy. So it's all in one place. So there's absolute clarity. Because now we're a Unitary Board as opposed to an advisory board. I think that just seemed like the right thing to do. So can I just check if there are any comments about the proposed? Very
Yeah, not a comment, just to say that it was reviewed at the last meeting of ARAC, and we were very supportive. The only observation I've made, Stephen, with all of these things, it's worthwhile reviewing them in 12 months to see how they're operating. But very much support it. Thank you.
I think that's helpful. Mercy, was that a comment from you?
Yeah, it was just that I really welcomed it, because when I joined, I wanted a clear policy and I didn't really have one. So this makes it really clear to me. Yeah, so I just welcome it. Thank you.
Okay. So, colleagues, can I just ask if we are happy to approve this particular policy for immediate implementation? I'm seeing thumbs up. So, Natalie, we record that as approved. So that brings us on to the last item on the agenda, which of course is getting some external perspective from members of the public who are actually watching the board meeting today. So Rachel, can I ask you to ask the first question, please?
Yes, of course, thank you. There's been several pre-submitted questions and a couple submitted this morning on isotretinoin, where there is an independent expert working group proceeding at the moment. So bringing those various questions together, the first part is around whether there is now a need to suspend the use of isotretinoin in people under 18 until the review has concluded. There is a question asking for a general update on the progress with the expert working group review and whether the expert working group will be engaging with patients, whether there is any patient representative for isotretinoin, and then there is also a point about whether you need 100% proof before a product is withdrawn from the market. So I've pulled those questions together, Stephen, but a variety of angles on them.
Yes, we have one comprehensive answer. June, obviously, could I ask you just maybe to comment on all those questions in one answer, but maybe just start by saying what isotretinoin is for members of the public?
Yes, isotretinoin, or for those that remember the brand name or had it, Roaccutane, is a treatment for very severe acne, that the kind that will leave a person with scars on their skin, and we know how much that can affect someone's life. That there might be long-term consequences, and it has always been a third line or after other local or antibiotic kinds of therapies haven't resulted in benefit. So that's its place in therapy under the supervision and advice of a dermatologist. So it's for that very serious population there. So some important questions being asked about suspension in under 18s, and while the review is ongoing, the evidence that's carefully being looked at at this moment doesn't justify suspending, but all the regulatory tools and options will be on the table because the review is progressing, second question, now very well. At this point, I'd like to say a big thank you to all the members of the public, patients and families who've submitted responses to the call for evidence, and every single one of these is going to be part of the overall picture that the expert group considers. The meeting is due to be later in April or possibly early May, because there's been a new chairman appointed, given that Sir Munir Mohammed is now chair of the Commission on Human Medicines. He had chaired the isotretinoin expert group for quite some time, and that way we had kept in touch with the accruing evidence. So progressing well, and the next part of that question is, will patients and the public be involved? Yes, certainly. There will be a meeting set up probably closer to summertime that will have direct engagement with those family members, patients and members of the public who've got views to share, and that's a commitment that we've made. The question about a patient representative, that's an interesting one and a good one, and it can be very helpful if the concept is of a kind of leading voice, but that doesn't want to cloud the perspectives of everyone who has a say. And very often in an area of therapeutic questioning, we've got a number of voices. So if a particular group comes forward and speaks for other members, fine, but if individuals want their voice to be heard, that's equally important. And the last question was you've just said about 100% proof. This is an interesting concept, but clearly what the experts aim to do once they've pulled together all available current evidence, considered that carefully, it's in the context of the overall benefit risk. So we tend not to look at 100% proof or levels of proof. We look at the overall integrated evidence base and benefit risk. And then if there are risks where risk mitigation or minimization can be improved, we seek to bring those to bear and always to monitor their impact. So just to summarize, Chair, it's moving forward. All views are really helpful, whether they're collective or individual, and those judgments, will it be informed by direct interaction with patients and their families?
Okay, so I think what you're saying, June, is a very current issue. You did mention that there's going to be a new chair to the expert working group that's looking at this. Has that person been appointed yet?
Yes, Professor Angela Thomas. I'm not sure that's been publicly announced, but I'm able to say that just now. It's really important in our expert system that when there's a hands-on expert group, then their report is looked at by the broad and very experienced Commission on Human Medicines. So we've got two layers of independence there that helps to build that confidence in the system.
And I think it's fair to say that on gov.uk website, our website, the details of that expert working group are detailed. The members are included there, plus their terms of reference. So, and that's actually where we'll continue to publicly provide information on that. Mercy, was this related? You've got a hand up. Is this related to this particular point? No. No. Okay, that's fine. Okay, thank you, June. Appreciate that. And I'm very pleased to welcome Karen Harrowing. So, Karen, thank you very much for joining us today. You took the care to send us a pre-submitted question, and you've obviously given us your permission to come on screen and video your image today. So, thank you for doing that. Thank you for taking interest in the work of the MHRA. And you had a question, I believe, on the classification of fillers. Would you like to express it?
Yes, and thank you. It's been fascinating to hear all the papers actually ahead of this question, because it's very relevant in terms of standards. So my question was in relation to the General Medical Council's guidance on prescribing and managing medicines and medical devices, which comes into force, the new guidance, in April 21. Now that includes reference to non-surgical cosmetic medicines as well as medical device prescribing in its widest sense. And we haven't had an update recently on the classification of fillers as prescription-only medical devices, which was a recommendation of the KEO review back in 2013. And I wondered if there was a focus on medical devices in this way, which are beyond probably some of your patient engagement, but much more relevant to a consumer engagement and potentially with social media influencers.
Okay, thank you, Karen. Sorry, I forgot to ask what your interest in this is. Do you represent any organisation?
I don't represent any organisation currently, but I have been writing to the MHRA on this for probably the last 15 years.
Okay, that's good. Well, thank you for taking the time. Sam, can I ask you to respond, please?
Yes, indeed. Thank you so much for the question. And it's really good to get these. And Sir Bruce Keogh's review back in 2013, clearly a really important a piece of work that obviously is still being looked at and worked on today. So I guess the first thing to say is that the area that we regulate really only, with respect to dermal fillers, really relates to those that have medical claims. So those that are actually defined as medical devices, as defined in Medical Devices Regulation 2002. And most of the fillers, I guess, are really used for, or intended to be used for, reconstructive surgery. But there are also some, as you say, for cosmetic use or aesthetic use. So for those particular ones, then obviously that's slightly more challenging and fall perhaps between the regulatory gaps. But it's certainly those that are being placed on the market without this sort of medical claim or medical purpose being attributed to them, as I say, makes it a little bit more difficult. That said, the majority of fillers do actually have a CE mark. So it's probably worth noting that with the improvement with the medical device regulations coming through and the work that we'll be doing on that, there will be opportunity certainly for those that do get a CE mark, or indeed the UK mark, will have a greater level of scrutiny. Now, medical devices unfortunately can't be designated as prescription only at the moment, as unfortunately the definition doesn't actually apply to these particular products. And as far as I'm aware at the moment, there's no plans to change that, although as I say, the Sir Bruce Keogh's review is still actually out there and obviously being worked on. So I guess it's a bit of work in progress and possibly not the comprehensive solution that you perhaps wanted at this point in time, but it's a work in progress, Karen, I guess.
Okay, and Sam, could I just come back to you as well, just in terms of maybe could you just give a little explanation on what we do about these borderline products that, you know, they are not technically medical devices, but potentially, you know, they are used in humans, and how we address that, because yeah, the patient still has a right to expect products to be safe. How do we manage these margins, because it's difficult from a regulatory point of view because they're not technically a medical device.
Yes, it's a really difficult. I mean, borderline products just generally, maybe I can just comment on that. I mean, they are really, really tricky. We first of all have to identify, you know, whether we have that remit or not, and whether they fall within the regulations and the legislative sort of remit that we have. Because obviously there's a level of challenge if we identify things and regulate something that falls out of our remit, which is where our hands are tied to a point. So I guess that assessment initially happens. Obviously, if they fall within our remit, we'll obviously take them through the normal process and review as we would do any other product, whether it's medicine or a device. Those that fall outside, then we tend to work really closely with partners to actually ensure that they are getting the oversight that's required. And sometimes, I mean, as I say, that, you know, we do see some things that fall between the regulatory cracks, and we have to work especially hard to try and really ensure that the patients and the public are protected in this respect. And indeed, sometimes we pick things up. E-cigarettes, for example, is a classic example of something that we've taken forward separately. And CBD is another example where we worked very closely with the Department of Health and Social Care when there's, again, it's perhaps fallen between regulatory cracks. So I think there's a lot of work ongoing in this area, and we're very cognizant of those elements that do fall on the borderline, and try and do our bit to ensure the patient remains safe.
Okay, Karen, I built on your question there, but do you want to come back and ask anything else?
I'd just like to probably make an observation from my perspective. So, as I say, I've been interested. I'm a pharmacist by background. I've been interested in the differences between some of the NHS work and some of the independent sector work, and was an independent advisor to the Patterson inquiry that ran obviously with some very similar areas to the Cumberledge review. I think the observation I would make is that the power of the internet and the micro harms that happen to patients, and particularly women, through these fillers have then crept into the problems with Botox, etc., and then undermining patient confidence in prescription-only medicines. And I think that was very evident that actually in the middle of the pandemic, there was a requirement for the debate in Parliament on the Botox for children bill. And I think there then undermines the public confidence in items such as vaccines. I started my journey in independent healthcare quite appalled at what was happening when single-use vaccines were being promoted in the independent healthcare sector against public health advice on MMR. Yeah. And it just seems to have come full circle from my perspective in my professional career. So I raise it. It might seem a minor point in terms of fillers, but it has a much wider perspective.
I think the wider perspective is not lost on us, and I think, you know, it's not just in this area. Hence why I was asking about the borderline products, because I think this could affect other areas too. So it's something I think we're going to have to keep working on. I think is probably what we're going to need to do. But thank you for your interest, Karen. I really appreciate you coming on screen today and asking your question. But hopefully that goes some way to showing that, you know, we're now aware of the issue. Thank you very much. Rachel, can I ask what the next question is?
Yeah, so the next question is a pre-submitted question that's actually been amended slightly during the meeting around giving the COVID-19 vaccine to clinically extremely vulnerable children. And that is allowed under the current regulations as long as a physician agrees it's in the child's best interest. The questioner is saying that in practical terms, this isn't the case because there isn't a policy or guidelines that GPs can rely on, and hospital trusts don't have policies or protocols to follow. So the questioner is asking whether this is indeed the case and whether the MHRA can do anything to get this bottleneck opened for the benefit of vulnerable children.
Okay, June, could I maybe come to you on that? You know, is there something we can do to open the bottleneck, as Rachel describes it?
I'm listening hard, and thank you very much for bringing forward this question, because we do want all the benefits of these vaccines to be available when needed, and these clinically vulnerable children are absolutely in the frame, and that's why, as you've just heard, we took steps back in January to make sure that the approvals we gave for the 3 vaccines, 2 currently in use and 1 coming, actually have that ability to make sure that a clinician can make that judgment. I think what you're identifying is probably a gap in guidance or help for physicians to make those judgments. We work closely with the NHS, and in fact, after we made that change, we ran a series of briefings together with the medical director of the NHS, and I know the chief medical officers of the devolves were all brought into the frame. But if we're hearing that the information isn't easily accessible to those who are making those decisions, I would suggest that we take it away and make sure that the Joint Committee on Vaccination and Immunisation is aware. And if in follow-up to your question, you might like to give us a little bit more information, we can help to bridge that. In summary, there's no problem from the regulatory conditions if it's about understanding by the practitioners that they can use this to help protect vulnerable children, then we'll see how we can make that information reach the parts it needs to reach. So I hope that helps. If you want to follow up, please do with more detail, and we will then be able to help to bridge the gap. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Jane. I'm hearing there a commitment to actually raise this particular point, you know, with the JCVI, which is ultimately, you know, our ability to connect with the rest of the system. So thank you for that. Rachel, another question, please.
Yeah, so the next question is about tablets. And this question is asking whether the MHRA could influence the pharmaceutical industry to make any one type of pill or medication with a consistent physical colour, size and shape and dose, so that it's very clearly recognisable by patients that they have the right product, rather than perhaps the same product looking different.
Okay.
So it's about making things easier for patients to recognise the products they're taking.
Well, it's a very practical example. Sam, can I ask you maybe just a comment on the ability to influence industry on this?
Yeah, of course, absolutely, and I can totally appreciate the ask around this, and I guess as it's been recognised, it is really possible for medication to vary with respect to colour, size and shape, or the markings on them, for example, especially where we've got various different generic versions, and obviously by the very nature of a generic medicine, it's effectively a copy of the innovator or the original medicine, and it is, while we require it to be the same or have the same content of the active ingredient, for example, and to be safe and effective, we can't really impose sort of appearance or any other elements like that, because there's no real legal requirement to do that. So it does present a bit of a challenge, because, as I say, I can totally understand why the patient would want that. So we can only really, I guess, refuse to grant things on basis of quality, safety or efficacy. So it doesn't really come down to other things. So we would always advise, as you would expect, I think, Chair, that obviously the information that's provided with the product is obviously scrutinised before any medication is taken. And it's probably worth also just pointing out that some generic manufacturers actually try and improve the product, so it might be, for example, better or easier to swallow, or what have you. So yeah, bit tricky. I guess maybe one of the things we can think about is how do we potentially influence industry, and what can be done there, and particularly what can be done in terms of getting the patient voice to industry, so that they're aware of these concerns. And I wonder, Chairman, whether it might be worth us considering trying to contact ABPI, for example, or one of the other trade associations, to try and talk to them about it, or even see whether they would be interested in communicating with a patient representative, for example.
I think that's an excellent idea. The ABPI is the Association of the British Pharmaceutical Industry, so that's the trade association that represents all commercial companies in the area of pharmaceuticals, and I think we can take away an action to actually specifically make Richard Talbot, the director of ABPI, aware of this, and to ask him what route there is, because there's presumably some sort of patient discussion forum within ABPI that we can maybe make sure that this is actually raised with them. So ultimately, I think it's an industry decision, but I think that we can certainly pass the question on. So it's a very practical one, a good example of patient engagement. So thank you very much for raising the question, and I think we'll pass that on to ABPI with the individual's consent. Okay, Rachel, another question, please.
Yeah, so there's actually two questions about yellow cards, so perhaps I could link those together. The first one is saying that without follow-up, the yellow card doesn't have a benefit for patients directly. So what can be done to make patients feel valued when they contribute yellow cards? And then a different question, but still on yellow card, about whether there's consideration given to particular patient groups who may not want to fill out a yellow card. So, for example, teenagers or grieving parents, or patients who are traumatized.
Yeah, okay. June, would you be able to just give a quick response on that?
Well, first of all, every report is valued, and I think the questioner has put their finger on, we don't show it, we say it, I hope, but probably not in the right way or often enough. The new Safety Connect system, and I know that's a word that probably is an internal word for our new IT infrastructure, is going to be geared having that interaction so that people know what's happening to their report and know how important it is. it's inherent in the system that it takes a little bit of time for trends and issues to be put together. But what we want to do is take the patient on that journey. Not every report is going to add to the sum total of knowledge. It may change the knowledge qualitatively, or it may be something we've never heard about. But to show how much each one is valued is the challenge you've given us, and we accept it. It's high time that we did. In terms of particular patient groups, we understand the need for us to make it easy to report, whether it's by phone, through your pharmacist, using an app, you know, whether a teenager would rather do something that's very technically sophisticated and part of their, you know, phone. We need to understand all of that and then soak in that information. Parents who've been bereaved, I hope they're in an environment where someone will take that burden off them, or whatever. We will often reach out to a coroner for more information, or to the health professionals involved. So it's a really good question, and I do hope that the commitment we have through our reinvention of our ways of working, supported by the state-of-the-art computerization, will help to take us into the world that you want to be in, and we do too. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Because we're a few minutes late starting, I'd just like to continue with the questions a little longer, if that's okay with everybody. Rachel, another question, please.
Of course. This question, I think, has come as a result of the paper that the board considered earlier on EU exit, and it's asking whether the MHRA and or the board have assessed the level of risk to patients in them not being able to access medicines or devices as they need them.
Okay, June, can I ask you just to comment briefly on that?
It's absolutely at the front of our minds, and never more so at the moment, when we know that there are vital medicines that need to reach patients. And even if there are alternatives or changes that could be made, we don't want any patient to have any worry about their treatment that they're kept well with being interrupted anyway. So the assurance we give is at the front of mind. We know that there have been decisions, as the paper highlighted, that we need to work around and with, but we are absolutely on the case. And as I say, it's the top priority to make sure that whatever a patient's needs are, they can be met in whatever part of the UK. The level of risk is obviously at the heart of that, but we want to have that as minimal or zero as one could imagine. It's our commitment before EU exit transition completed, and it's our commitment now until such times as we have every assurance in all parts of the UK that there won't be any risk whatsoever.
Yeah, okay, that's great. Thank you. Rachel, another question?
Yeah, there's a pre-submitted question which is about the teratogenic risk of medicines, and the questioner is saying that the FDA in the States use a classification list and is asking whether the MHRA has a similar list available. Okay, June?
That really is an interesting question. We understand that the FDA in the US used to have a category-based classification, but in fact they've been doing a lot of work on safety of medicines in pregnancy, and they replaced that category about 5 years ago. What I would like to say is that we're really in close liaison with the FDA to enable our controls for teratogenic medicines to be the best they can be. In Europe, we've relied on quite elderly guidance, but that's based on the amount of evidence you have. But there are other sorts of evidence that we need to bring to bear. So our safety of medicines in pregnancy group is really on the case with how to make sure that we look at teratogenic medicines that have an important benefit risk, if the teratogenicity can be managed, are actually used as safely as possible on the basis of best information. So again, it's a work in progress. Certainly we've got the tools in place, working with the FDA and the EMA to do the very best in today's world on people who need to use medicines with this risk attached.
That's great. Thank you. Rachel, how many more questions have we got? Just a matter of interest.
Well, every time we seem to be getting towards the end, we have some more questions coming.
Good.
So I think we're in your hands on timing.
Let's take some more. It's a good discussion. I don't want to cut people off.
Okay, so there is a question here that I think relates back to the paper that Christian presented on laboratory strategy, and that is asking whether the current MHRA labs research emerging diagnostic technologies, and the questioner says that they are thinking of examples such as circulating tumour DNA.
Okay, Christian, can you comment briefly on that?
Thank you. I'm happy to take this. So the very quick answer is yes, indeed. So we do have a pan-cancer WHO standard in the making on circulating tumor DNA. And we have a whole portfolio of cancer genomics, either individual cancers or pan-cancers already in the NIPS catalog. I should add that genomic diagnosis and infectious diseases diagnostics are among the key features of our overall strategy. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you. Rachel, another one? You're on mute, Rachel.
Sorry. There's another question here about whether the MHRA is involved with the Independent Medicines and Medical Devices Safety Review Patient Reference Group.
Okay, June, could you comment on that?
Thank you. We remain very closely involved and will continue to be with all the work that colleagues in the DHSC are taking forward. And that includes the reference group. Clearly that has a leadership with our colleagues in the department, because it goes well beyond where MHRA can contribute to fulfilling the recommendations. So yes, we're involved, and yes, we have a plan with short, medium and long-term deliverables to make sure that recommendation 6 and 7 are absolutely delivered. So we will have a way to benefit from that group, but always keeping our focus on the job we need to do now.
Great. Okay, thank you, June. That was clear. Rachel, another one?
Yes, certainly. Going back to the discussion about patient involvement, there is a question about how soon can we realistically expect the patient voice to be genuinely heard and see the agency put patients at the heart of everything it does?
Well, that's a very good question, actually. Again, June, I'm going to come back to you again, if you don't mind.
I would say, in whatever way we receive that patient voice, it is integral to what we do now. But what we've said in this meeting now is that we need to focus on the outcome of hearing that voice and to have that plan in place. So I would say genuine is now, but impactful is still to be demonstrated. And I would ask, you know, you've all been good enough to come today. Follow us as we publish the strategy for doing that, and please kick the tires. Tell us what you think. It is genuine, but it needs to be demonstrably so, and that's what we're aiming at.
Yeah, I think it's really important to understand that we do take patient views into account already, but I think what we want to do is to increase the profile of that and to make sure there's also better responses to patients. So it's less of a black box and it's a much more integrated way of working. So Rachel, how about one more question?
Yeah, perhaps a final question, which relates to COVID vaccines. And this is, the questioner is asking whether there's an increased risk for patients with autoimmune disorders. And that's with the COVID vaccine.
Okay. Again, June, can I just come back to you again one last time?
An important aspect of filling any evidence gaps, and there are ongoing studies that we're closely following. Recent information, particularly in related to a vulnerable group with immune deficiency cancer patients, we're looking at actively. So at the moment, there's no particular change that I would like to highlight, but it's very much an area we're actively seeking to address. If anyone has a specific question about a certain autoimmune condition, do please let us know, because we're looking at a spread of aspects to this question, but actively following up with dedicated studies.
That's great. Okay, right, thank you very much. I think, Rachel, we should probably draw it to a close at that particular point. I think that's a full 30 minutes of questions from the public and patients, which is fantastic. So I'd just like to thank everybody who's raised a question, both in advance and during the meeting. We do appreciate your input. I'd just like to say thank you to my colleagues and to everyone who's been involved in preparing all the board papers. Yeah, the role of the MHRA is all about protecting and improving patient health. You know, I think we've got a responsibility to enable healthcare access by getting new products to patients more quickly. We've got a responsibility for patient safety, and organisationally, we want to make sure that we reflect that in everything that we do. So I'd just like to thank everybody for your attention today, and we'll see you all again next time. Thank you very much, and goodbye.